Hi folks, it is Thibaut Van Dam here with another YouTube video. And for those of you who are not familiar with my channel, I am a DIY singer-songwriter and also guitar tutor based in Southeast London. Today, I am very excited to be continuing my series about practical guitar and music theory, specifically looking at functional harmony. Functional harmony is a topic that I've talked about before in my previous lessons and also elsewhere on my channel, and it is one of the most exciting aspects, I think, of music theory. I view it as the point at which music theory starts to loosen its grip on the musician and allows the songwriter to flourish. This is because functional harmony is a point in music theory which is very subjective. It involves a lot of interpretation, and for YouTubers out there like 12 Tone who use functional harmony as a way of analyzing other people's songs, this is something that I aspire to start doing more of on this channel. And after this discussion, I will be making more videos where I start to do that, where I look at people's songs and I break them down using functional harmony, and I sort of ask myself, what am I experiencing when I hear this? And I think that this points to a really important aspect of music that I think gets overlooked at a certain point, especially in music theory, which is that, for me anyway, and for many I would hope, the experience of music, it's experiential, it's visceral, it's emotional, it's kind of enigmatic. We don't always understand it. And it's expressive. And to have all these things fit into place, usually, we're not very conscious of what's going on. We don't really know. There's a sort of mystique and magic to that. And all to say that at this point in this series as well, and in theory, in learning music theory, that this is the point at which I think many musicians have to reflect on what it is they're trying to express musically and trying to convey to others. Because actually, the message, the thing you're trying to say, can be communicated musically if you know what you're trying to say. And so that what you're trying to express takes precedent over whatever theory we'll be talking about today. Now, that said, we are going to be looking at the conventions of songwriting, what people typically understand to be pathways of communicating a narrative. And that's because the narrative that is being looked at today kind of is almost a philosophical viewpoint. It's a way to look at the whole world, the way that life exists and the way the universe can exist. And I love that because for me, music helps me understand and make sense of the world I think I exist in. And I know that maybe I'm getting a bit deep here, but all to say that there are conventions of songwriting, and that's what we'll be looking at today. We'll be looking at the German school of thought. We'll be looking at the Viennese school of thought briefly. And we'll also be talking about some conventional cadences that you can incorporate. It's important to remember, like I've said, sort of, I think, almost like a broken record now, that what you have to say is more meaningful than what any of the theory is that we'll be looking at today, but that this can give you conventions. And in that sense, and to that end, I think functional harmony serves an incredibly important purpose, because what it allows people that are new to guitar to do is it allows new songwriters to write songs with confidence and say, I know that this is a convention and I know this is going to sound good, and that people are not going to say, I don't get it, it sounds weird. And eventually, once you trust yourself enough, you may start to separate from that and say, actually, these conventions don't suit my expressive needs anymore. And you end up making weird music like me, and you say, actually, I found this musical voice for myself, and this is communicating what I'm trying to say, even though it doesn't really fit into these cadences or these frameworks or structures that exist. So I think this is an incredible video. You can definitely use it in the incredible, I don't know about the video, but I know the theory is incredible, and I know that you can use this theory to help understand other people's songs. And this is also another really exciting way of writing your own music, understanding what other people have done. This is how a lot of people learn, especially informally. On top of this, in the future, we will be talking about additional music theory devices, for instance, secondary dominants, borrowed chords, also chromatic mediants, and the circle of fifths. You absolutely need to know after this. As soon as we talk about this, you'll say, what is the circle of fifths? And I encourage you to go check it out in the meantime. So if this sounds interesting, please stay tuned. Please consider liking the video. Please consider subscribing to the channel. It's the best way to stay in the loop. It helps me feel accountable for the channel. It lets me know people actually like what I'm doing. They want to see more. I don't make money from this, but to see that people get value from what I'm doing means a lot. It helps me feel like what I'm doing is meaningful, and I think there is meaning in music, so I'm glad I do it anyway. Thanks to everyone that does subscribe. It's why I'm here right now. Let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I have to go through are the prerequisites. There are things you have to know in order to understand what we'll be talking about today. Or if you're anything like me, you can sort of dive in at the deep end. And what I will do is overview some of these topics so that you sort of have a gist of what we're talking about, even if you were to watch this video unto itself. That said, along the way, I'll be putting links to assorted videos that I have made that explore all these topics in more detail so that hopefully if you don't understand one aspect of some topic that you can understand it by watching that video. And I should also say there are timelines. It's, usually it's self-evident, but if you do want to skip around, if you don't want to watch the prerequisite thing, if you've seen all of them, then please, skip to the next section. Prerequisites. You need to have a good idea of practical guitar skills. You have to be able to hold the instrument and fret. This is pretty obvious, but this is how we actually will get these ideas into practice. You should know about your basic chord structures, the major and minor chords that exist, but in terms of theory, the thing that allows us to get to this place, this sort of more universal place of theory, it's important that you know the following: the chromatic scale. The chromatic scale includes the 12 notes that we have at our disposal on the guitar. There are only 12 notes available. These are what those 12 notes are. And that some of those notes are being called sharp using a hashtag symbol, I guess, hashtag, I don't know. But that also, those same notes could be called flat. And that is a relative concept, that what is sharp and flat is relative, and context space. Perhaps as important as the chromatic scale is the idea that the notes that we are talking about, those 12 notes, have equal temperament, meaning that they have equal musical function and value and operation and opportunity to every other note. That the note A is not any more special than A sharp or B, and that you can make a major scale, major chord, minor chord, or alternative chord or chord extensions using any of these notes. That those things are then formula based. This tells us about the universality of the theory on which this Western music theory is built, and that allows us to navigate these things with this sense of confidence, where we can actually start to speculate on songwriting methods. Okay. Building off of the idea of equal temperament, we have the idea of intervals. And I think that important to understand the idea of intervals and even to understand notes, I just want to digress briefly to confront, I think, a misguided aspect of music theory, which is that the notes have letters, but actually they operate way more like numbers or a tally system in a sense, that we see the note F. And we think of words that have to do with F. We see A and we see D and we start spelling things. That's not how music works, actually, even though that's a nice idea. And some people actually, I saw a meme where people are like kind of playing sort of notes and they're singing along to the notes. Yes, it sort of is there, but actually not really, no. And so integral to understanding this is the idea that notes are like the inch marks on a ruler, and that therefore intervals characterize the space between any two marks, that the space between 0 and 2 is 2 inches. This is important because we can measure 2 inches using a different mark. 2 to 4, for instance, is also 2 inches. And so therefore, there are only 12 intervals. We have intervals ranging from majorness and minorness, perfect, like the perfect fourth and perfect fifth, and then even a tritone right in the middle. And so these are what those intervals are, and you should have them memorized. There are also something called compound intervals, but we'll talk about that later. The major scale. The major scale is a formula founded on a root, which therefore can be any notes in the chromatic scale, and it follows whole steps and half steps. And it gives us a sequence of notes that is giving us the impression of majorness, or what some people call happy, or whatever. Again, subjective and interpretive. Then major and minor triads and chord extensions. These are the chords that we have, and they follow also formulas based on a root. Again, any note in the chromatic scale, followed by a relative perfect fifth and a relative major or minor third. And in the case of major seventh chords, a major chord with a major seventh, minor seventh chords with a minor seventh, and then dominant chords, a major chord with a minor seventh, which is sort of musically tense and makes us feel like we want resolve. This chord in particular, the dominant chord, is very important for today's video because it plays a role in how we understand functional harmony. It is also very important that you know about the harmonized major scale and the harmonized major seventh scale. The harmonized major scale and major seventh scale tell us that actually in any given major key, that there is an order to major chords and minor chords and how they present as they associate with scale degrees. This is very important because therefore we can abstract the idea of chord progressions from what specific key you're in to what I call the key concept. The key concept being that you have a major 1 chord. It could be C major, it could be D major, it could be G sharp major, and that could be your major 1. But that the idea is that the relative spaces, the relative scale degrees, and the associated major and minorness to each of those scale degrees as chords is universal as well. This is because the process of harmonizing the major scale is a standardized process of stacking diatonic thirds. It's a little bit tedious, it's a little bit complex, but once you understand that, then you are untethered and you can get to really exciting things like this. So hopefully you do understand what I'm talking about there. And the importance, of course, of the harmonized major 7th scale is that it shows us which specific chord is inherently dominant in a given major key. This is important because it tells us that actually there is inherent dominance in any given major key, and that we can therefore start to get an organic understanding of functional harmony through that. Additional concepts that are important: understanding the Roman numeral system and also scale degrees, and also knowing about the relative major-minor relationship as it relates to scales, but in particular today, as major chords relate to their relative minor chords. Okay, cool. If you know all that, and that took me like 12 minutes to explain, let's get into it. What are we going to start with? We're going to start with the harmonized major scale. This is our point of departure. So this is the harmonized major scale. This is the pattern of major chords and minor chords as they associate with scale degrees. In this case, capital means major, lowercase means minor, and the tally system, or the system of Roman numerals, is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Major 1, minor 2, minor 3, major 4, major 5, minor 6, diminished 7. This is also a minor chord, but to show diminishedness, what a word, I don't think it's a real word, but diminishedness, there it is, with that small circle, that tells us it's diminished. Okay, cool. Using this, I just want to demonstrate quickly how this actually appears and presents. So playing a C major scale. Those are the notes in C major, following that pattern of the major scale. Now, each of those scale degrees could be associated with each of these characterizations of chords. So major 1, minor 2, minor 3, major 4, major 5, minor 6, diminished 7, major 1. This is a very important idea because this shows us which chords automatically are going to sound good together. And if you're really feeling risky, or if you just don't even feel like engaging with this, you could really write music just playing through those chords. You could mix and match them. You could try to work out functional harmony for yourself. Again, to emphasize, these are guidelines for understanding functional harmony operation in songwriting. Okay, now working within that, I want to introduce the German school of thought. Now, the German school of thought is founded on 3 families of chords. I don't know why it feels like I'm talking about the mafia. The 3 families of chords. The German mafia, I guess. I don't know. So you have 3 major functions in any key, any major key. That you first have a tonic. Your tonic essentially is home, and that you like being home. And in the case of C major, it is the 1 chord. And we like being home, but something weird about home is that if we stay here too long, we start to get a little restless. The analogy I'll give in this case is that I am in my bedroom. I rent out this room, and home for me is being in this bedroom. Not in the house, just in the bedroom. That's because I don't rent out the other rooms, and I don't live in the kitchen. I sleep here, I feel comfortable here. I've made this space my own, I feel very comfortable here. C, in this case, is my bedroom. Now the thing is, like I said, if you stay at home long enough, you start to get restless. For instance, I am hankering to go outside to the park and get some fresh air for sure, but after this video. So the next obvious place to go is the subdominant. This is the 2nd function in the German school of thought. The subdominant is the 4 chord, or in the case of C major, F. And the equivalent for me in this room is like going to my bedroom door. The decision to go anywhere, whether it's the park or whether it's to go to the kitchen, I have to go to my bedroom door although I technically could jump out my window, but I don't plan on doing that. So this is my point, that there are great analogies in this. Like, what does jumping out of my window mean? It's probably something like, you know, the 5 of 5 or something really weird like that. Anyway, okay, the next function, dominant. Now the idea of the dominant chord usually is, in my mind, in this analogy, is the front door, is the decision to go out to the park, to go get some fresh air. And the interesting thing about the 5 and the dominant chord and that function is that if I go out of the door to leave, even if I do something weird, like go to my neighbor's house and, I don't know, steal their garbage or something, which is, again, it could make sense in like a modulatory kind of sense, if that's a word, I don't know, that I will probably come back through that same front door to return to my bedroom. And that this, in a nutshell, I hope in this analogy that has hopefully made sense, that this is the function of the German school of thought, that you have a tonic, home, subdominant, which is kind of like a step away from home, a point of tension, and that the 5 is yet the penultimate form of tension, the decision to either leave entirely or to return to your room. And what's interesting about the 5, and it's something I'll talk about later in another video, is that you can, in fact, leave. For example, you can use it as a point to leave this tonality, the tonality being the key. That was weird, but it works. Musically speaking, it would work if I wanted to write a song about that. Also works. Also works. There's some cool stuff that's possible using this kind of analogy, using this idea of functional harmony. I think, again, the most exciting stuff is when you break the convention, doing stuff like that. Anyway, okay, so we have 3 chords that are associated. So I want to show you my chart. I've made a chart because I didn't want to write it out. I wanted to save a bit of time. The true function of the tonic being home is the 1, comprised in the case of C, E, and G. Here we have the subdominant. This is the bedroom door. It's the 4, comprised of F, C, and A. And here we have the dominant, which is the front door, a pivotal point, usually returning back. You can see here, tonic goes to the subdominant, subdominant goes to dominant, dominant goes back to tonic usually, to go to the 5. That is the 5, G, D, and B. Okay. So the thing is, we have 3 chords that we're using, the 1, the 4, and the 5. What about all the other chords? The 2, the 3, the 6, the 7. What do we do with those? Well, this is why we need to know about the relative major-minor relationship. See, because there are chords in this key that are relatively related to each of those major functions, right? That there are relative minor operations that parallel each of those functions. The 1, for instance, is paired with the 6. The 4 is paired with the 2, and the 5 is paired with the 3 chord. In the case of C major, the way that presents is that C is paired with A minor. And when I say the 6, I mean the 6th chord or the 6th scale degree in the scale of C. C, D, E, F, G, A. That is 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, A. Minor 6 relates to the major 1 as a relative minor and relative major connection. And I want to take a moment to reflect on what makes this relatively related. Why is A minor relatively related to C major? Why? Well, the idea comes from the position that there are 2 notes shared between, so C, like I said, C major is the true tonic, and that A minor is relatively related to C because it has 2 of the 3 notes that C uses. In the case of A minor, it's A, C, and E. So C major is comprised of C, E, and G, and A minor is comprised of A, E, and C. So there are 2 notes in common there. So it's relatively linked because it sounds like it, but not quite. And as it would happen in explaining that each of the major functions has their own relative minor function, so that the 4, like I said, is related to the 2, which is D minor, the second chord, C, D minor, and that is an alternative, a relative minor subdominant function. And that G is the dominant, and it has a relative minor, which is the 3 chord, or the E minor in the case of C major. And that they're inherently linked because they share 2 notes in common. Okay, so now we have 6 chords of the entire key. We have the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, and the 6. The 7 chord has been omitted. We are not making use of the 7 chord, and I think it's a causal thing, maybe owing to music theory and the way it's developed. I don't know, but for whatever reason, the 7 does get overlooked. The 7 chord, the diminished 7, is not used very frequently in conventional or popular music. We do see it appear, however, in a lot of jazz and a lot of other styles of music, and it is more popular there. And so where does the 7 appear in functional harmony? How do we make sense of this? And actually, let's ask a bigger question. Where does the idea of even these 3 chords derive? Why is there a true 1? Why is true dominant, true tonic? Where does that idea come from? The subdominant, dominant, and tonic. Where are we getting that from? So the idea comes from the following, that if you were to play 3 chords in the key of C major, equally spaced by a 5th going in either direction, that you would play every note in the C major scale. That when you play C, F, and G, you are actually playing every note in the C major scale. You're playing C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you're playing every single note there. This is important. And so to illustrate this further, I want to remind people that have seen my other videos, or to tell you about my 0-2 practical string rule, which is not unique to me, but it is what I call it, and it's how I make sense of it. The idea being that when you play an open string and the 2nd fret on the string below, you are playing a perfect 5th interval. That is because the space between this note and the 2nd fret on the string below is 7 frets, which is a perfect 5th interval. And here's that chart of the intervals again, just to be sure. So this note happens to be E, that note happens to be B, and E to B is 7 frets, or a perfect 5th. However, B to the following E, so E to B is a 5th, but B to the following E is actually a perfect 4th. This is weird, and this is kind of where this idea comes from, the idea of the symmetrical and reciprocal nature of intervals and therefore chords and function in music theory. So this is one of the issues we're confronted with. As people, we have a pitch bias. We also have a sequential bias. We tend to interpret later things relating to former things. So when we hear, we relate this and that to that. It's just something we do. It just so happens we also have pitch bias. So we tend to identify lower notes as the root, and we relate higher notes to the lower note. Now, theoretically, if we could transcend our humble human form and pretend for a second that we were not tethered to these biases, when we play E to B and we play them at the same time, we are playing both a perfect 4th and a perfect 5th and a perfect 4th simultaneously. And what this shows us is that there are reciprocal intervals, and that therefore there's actually another 4th and 5th associated with E. And that note is A. A is a perfect 4th away from E, the 0-0 practical string rule. And that A to the following E, however, is a perfect 5th. So when we hear E and A at the same time, we are hearing both a perfect 5th and a perfect 4th simultaneously. Just like when we play E to B, we are also hearing a perfect 5th and a perfect 4th simultaneously. So this reciprocal nature tells us that there is actually the tonic, this is the 1st chord in the key, and that there is the dominant, which is a 5th away, and that there is the reciprocal 5th, which is the 4, which is a 5th away going the opposite direction. I hope that makes sense. What does this do? Well, this allows us to account for what is called the counterrelative. Now, I'm going to try to be as brief as I can about this because it's not a conventional use of these chords, but it is important to keep in mind because it is where we get to incorporate the 7. And it associates with the families that we're talking about now, the tonic family, the subdominant family, and the dominant family. And the reason why we have the counter relatives is because just like with the relative chords to the true tonic, subdominant, and dominant, that they also share 2 notes in common. And I'll show you those chords now, and I'll show you my chart, and I'll try to explain as quickly as I can. But here we have the counter relative chords. So you can see here that the 3 is the counter relative tonic, and the 6 is the relative tonic. And notice how EGB, or EBG, as I've written it here, E and G come from C and G, so C, E, G from the C major chord. So this is like a relative minor, except it's the counter relative. The 3 chord it could be a tonic, and it can also be a dominant. It's the relative dominant or the counter relative tonic. The 6 is the counter relative subdominant, but it can also be the relative tonic. And then the 7, here's where we get the 7. The 7 is the counter relative dominant, but it also can be thought of as the leading tone, which leads me to the next sort of school of thought, which I haven't even talked about, the Viennese school. The Viennese school of thought basically acknowledges that none of these chords are fully interchangeable. So to say that if we play 1, 2, 4, 5, that yes, that technically we did tonic, subdominant, subdominant, dominant, and that follows these guidelines, but that the D minor does not sound like it can be a shoe-in for the F. That this is major and this is minor, and therefore they're different, and we have a whole different system to actually talk about that, which includes these descriptors here. That the 1 chord is still the tonic, the 4 chord is still the subdominant, and the 5 chord is still the dominant, and that these are still the most important, but that the 2 is the supertonic, the 3 is the mediant, the 6 is the submediant, and for that exact same reason, by the way, is up here, that kind of reciprocal thing, and that the 7 is the leading tone. Cool. Now I want to talk about cadences quickly. I can see I'm sort of running out of time. So cadences. Cadences are larger, broader ways of understanding chord progressions, to describe them and think about them in their operation. So the first cadence we have, the most popular, is the 5 to the 1. That is called the authentic cadence. Then we have the 5 to the 6, the relative minor of the tonic. And so it feels like you're going home, but it's a lonely place, in essence. Then we also have the 4 to the 1, which is very satisfying. It feels religious, and it was used in a lot of religious music. And then we have the half cadence. The half cadence includes any tonic or any subdominant as it goes to the dominant, including relative minor. So the C is a half cadence, or we could also do the 6 to the 5 is a half cadence, and same with the 4. So half cadence and half cadence. Yep. Cool. The only other thing I can think to mention here is the circle of fifths. The circle of fifths is a visual representation of the topics we have been discussing today. I will include an image of it here so you can have a gander at it and begin to sort of speculate as to what's going on. I can kind of even explain briefly that the notes are separated working clockwise a fifth away from the former notes, so that C is a perfect fifth away from F, that G is a perfect fifth away from C. It's important to think of this directionality because if you thought about it in a counterclockwise way, you would end up with the circle of fourths, which speaks to this reciprocal intervallic concept that I talked about earlier. And that just about does it. I want to emphasize that this is a point of exploring songwriting, that these are not rules, that rules are meant to be broken, and that there are fun devices we're going to look at in future videos. If you did find this informative and helpful, please consider liking the video. Please consider subscribing to the channel. There's a lot of more exciting stuff to come. I'm really excited to talk about other people's songs and analyze them on this channel, like people like 12 Tone. And thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing, and I will see you at the next one. Ciao for now.